Jason Arday is dead, and the racist mainstream media killed him. That has been the narrative spun since the disgraced Cambridge professor was tragically found dead at a property in South London last Friday. Arday's awful, untimely death, apparently by his own hand, has been held up by activists as the grimly predictable consequence of a weeks-long smear campaign against him by the press. This was a public assassination, a lynching of a brilliant black man for having the temerity to think he belonged at Cambridge. There's just one problem with this. It's not true. And in the attempt to turn Arday into a martyr, brought down by a white supremacist media, we see a kind of derangement, a racial hysteria we had hoped had come and gone with 2020 and the peak of Black Lives Matter.
Thousands of people in the UK and around the world who are appalled by the public assassination of Jason Arday. The lynching. The lynching.
Arday was the story of the summer. 2 weeks ago, he resigned from his professorship at Cambridge University following mounting evidence that he had plagiarised large sections of his PhD thesis, fabricated personal achievements, lied about racist intimidation he had suffered, and perhaps even exaggerated the extent of his autism in his youth. This was a spectacular fall from grace, for Arday was more than an academic. He was a sensation. He guest-edited the Today programme. He was profiled on Good Morning America. A blockbuster memoir was in the works, all off the back of his incredible story, that of the poor, illiterate, neurodiverse kid who became a top academic, marathon runner, and charity fundraiser. For Cambridge, he was a symbol. When he was appointed in 2023 as a Professor of Sociology of Education, Arday was presented as the embodiment of the barriers faced by many underrepresented groups across higher education. His mere presence was supposedly proof that Cambridge was committed to fighting the racism and ableism that supposedly lurked amongst its colleges. Since Arday's death, there has been a desperate attempt to rewrite recent history, to downplay his lies, to smear journalists for doing their job, and all for straightforwardly political reasons. This tragedy is being exploited to fit an agenda, one that is pro-DEI and anti-press freedom, and it needs to be called out. The bogus narrative now being forged goes something like this. Arday was a young professor, minding his own business, when the media suddenly decided to take him down. He was accused of plagiarism, but then exonerated, but still they kept on coming. So furious were they that a black man was ever given a perch at Cambridge. It's hard to know where to start with this. By the time Arday resigned, the same day that Cambridge finally opened an investigation into his academic conduct, the case against him was overwhelming. The Telegraph found over 100 passages in his PhD that were identical or near identical to those in another student's thesis. Worse still, in his later papers, he was accused of falsifying data, of lifting quotes from other academics and passing them off as quotes from his own interviewees. This would, if proven, amount to academic fraud, something much more serious than plain old plagiarism. And contrary to the chatter online, these weren't just wild accusations or rumours. The Times, the Telegraph and other publications pored over his output, commissioned independent academics to analyse it, and courted a range of expert opinion. And what they found was damning. The claim that Arday was exonerated stems from one investigation by Liverpool John Moores University, which awarded Arday his PhD. It concluded that his thesis was legit, as well it might, but this investigation hasn't been published. Apparently, it's strictly confidential. In the end, John Moores' good word wasn't enough for Cambridge, which was eventually forced to open its own inquiry after years of burying its head in the sand. Similarly, activists will point to the role one Nathan Coffness has played in this story as proof that this was all a racist campaign against Arday from the off. Coffness, a self-described race realist, posted a blog last month detailing extensive evidence of Arday's plagiarism, but Coffness was hardly the first or only person on this trail. David Harris, Professor Emeritus at Plymouth Marjon University, began privately contacting Cambridge and John Moores about his concerns about Arday in 2023. Had Cambridge heeded Harris's warnings, things could have turned out very differently. Jack Grove, a reporter at Times Higher Education, picked up these leads in 2025. Grove compiled 97 pages of evidence before his editors were spooked by a legal letter from top law firm Carter Ruck. Most chillingly, Arday also reported Harris and Grove to the police for supposedly harassing him. Then came the revelations that Arday had likely embellished, invented or flat out lied about his backstory. The details certainly stretched credibility, to say the least. He claimed to have run 30 marathons in 35 days, a feat that would have placed him among the world's elite sportsmen. He claimed to have raised an astounding £5 million for charity, a figure top celebrities would have struggled to achieve, and he claimed to have appeared in a TV series that began 2 decades before he was born. He also said he was mute until age 11 and illiterate until age 18 due to his autism, and to have suffered from everything from cancer to locked-in syndrome. For all the talk of right-wing smears, some of the most damning exposés in this area were published in liberal outlets. The Atlantic magazine found wild discrepancies between Arday's memoir and his book proposal for the memoir. The New York Times spoke to old schoolmates of his who recalled Arday as a talkative, wisecracking child. Perhaps most damning of all, The Guardian found zero evidence to support Arday's claim that he'd been threatened at work by a masked man with a knife. Arday also claimed a pig's head was left on his parents' doorstep in London. He said the Metropolitan Police had investigated this apparent hate crime and even found the butcher where the hog had been purchased. The Met says no such investigation ever took place. The butcher, which Arday named, had no recollection of this episode either. When pressed by The Guardian, the butcher said, "That's the kind of thing we'd remember." I take no pleasure in recounting all of this, in light of how this awful tale ended. I repeat it only to stress that there was a story here. The insistence that this was a whole lot of nothing cooked up by a racist press is a vicious lie. This matters, because the Arday controversy raises deep and difficult questions, not only about one man's credibility, but also about elite institutions that had, at best, turned a blind eye. It raises questions about his publisher, Simon & Schuster, which offered Arday a hefty advance for a memoir that couldn't withstand a basic sniff test, let alone a diligent fact-check. And above all, it raises questions about Cambridge. This is supposed to be one of the top universities in the world, and yet it junked the most basic standards in pursuit of an eye-catching hire. Someone who, with his fantastical story of triumph over adversity, and in his critical race theory-infused work, was the walking, talking embodiment of a DEI ideology that becomes so fashionable following the rise of BLM. Those who argued that Arday did not deserve his position are being accused of racism, but if anything, Arday's ascent through the academic ranks underlines the racism of modern anti-racism. DEI essentially insists that academic standards must be lowered in order for ethnic minorities to thrive. It also tends to elevate ethnic minority people who best fit the political script over those who are most accomplished. You see this all too clearly in the New York Times' reporting. It found that when Arday was interviewed for his position at Cambridge, he was up against 3 more senior scholars, including 2 women of colour. Despite his modest publication record, their words, he was catapulted into one of the most esteemed academic positions in the country, apparently at the expense of more qualified ethnic minority candidates. We may never know why Arday did what he did and said what he said, but the picture that emerges is one of a man who became trapped in his own fantasy land and who was indulged by institutions who should have known better until it all came tumbling down. He was put on a pedestal from which he was bound to fall. To accuse the media of effectively killing him is not only despicable, simplistic, and wrong, it also risks chilling the free press, presenting scrutiny of public and influential figures as dicing with death. And it risks presenting the taking of one's own life as an almost rational response to public criticism. This is a dangerous road to go down. Jason Arday's death was an unspeakable tragedy, but amid all the hysteria of recent days, we risk learning all of the wrong lessons. Journalists are being smeared for telling the truth, while activists are insisting we swallow another batch of falsehoods. There are calls to subject the press to state regulation, i.e. censorship.
We will put Andy Burnham under as much political pressure as we can. With your help to change that appalling state of affairs that has killed another person.
There are even lists of journalists who covered the Arday story doing the rounds online, including me, with activists fishing for embarrassing personal information about us.
Murderers, whom I will never call journalists, that contributed to Jason Arday's death. Please screenshot and do whatever the hell you want with this information.
Despicably, this tragedy is being used as a soapbox, not only to call for more state control over the press, but also to shore up the toxic, racist ideology of DEI. Everyone in possession of a soul wishes that Jason Arday, the man, were still with us. To say that he erred is not to say that he wasn't a cherished friend, colleague, family member, a human being. The thought of anyone making that worst and most final of decisions grates against our common humanity. But this myth of St. Jason, murdered by a racist press, is an affront to reason, truth, and genuine equality, which we simply cannot abide.